So, let's start with the problem. So, unfortunately, right now, we're in the middle of an underreporting crisis when it comes to experiences of workplace harassment and discrimination. Now, fortunately, last year, about sometime midsummer, in about June, the first crises started to break. And by October, by the autumn, we had Me Too. And people were reporting en masse that they had experienced workplace sexual harassment and wanted to speak up about it. Now, this is a great start. But the problem is that even over the last year, when we look at how many people have actually started reporting these things to their employers, we see absolutely dismal figures. North of 70%, or more than 70%, depending on which category you look at, will never report an experience of any kind of harassment or discrimination to their employer directly. For some categories of individuals, for some categories of what are referred to as protected characteristics, like your gender, like whether you're a mom or a dad, like whether you're part of the LGBT community, we see 98, 99% of people remaining silent. Now, the first step for any organization to be able to tackle this is to hear that it exists in the first place. We need to get people out from under their desks. And one way to do that is to understand why people aren't talking. Why aren't people coming forward about this issue? And the reasons that we see when we look at the literature, when we look at the science that tries to figure out why people aren't coming forward, is we see things like, I'm afraid of being fired, or I'm afraid of getting worse shifts, and I need those shifts because, well, I need to pay the bills. They see people saying that they don't want negative repercussions, social as well as financial. And unfortunately, research also supports, and I know that people often say, but it's illegal to have negative repercussions for coming forward about harassment and discrimination. That is absolutely correct. It is illegal to fire someone or to have adverse consequences for someone reporting these things. However, a lot of people experience adverse consequences, not the least of which is saying, we don't believe you. Now, these are real and also perceived fears. And when I talk to organizations in the US, in Canada, in the UK, I inevitably get the same response. Yes, Julia, harassment and discrimination, big problem. Me Too highlighted in our industry, this is a major issue. It's scaring away talent. It's probably affecting the quality of our work. It's probably even affecting our bottom line. But we have a great HR team. People know they can talk to our HR team. We don't need help. Now, I hear this over and over and over again. And it's not surprising because you may well have an amazingly committed, dedicated HR team. That may be completely true. They may be completely on the side of the employees. They may be absolutely committed to bringing in diverse teams and keeping them. The problem is that one of the reasons that people also cite for not telling their employers is that they're worried about bias. They're worried about not knowing whether something counts as harassment or discrimination in the first place. They're worried about, in some ways, the very human interaction of going and talking to someone. You need to set up a meeting. You need to decide that this is something serious. You can't really be anonymous because you're sitting in front of them. And let's be honest, if you're the kind of organization that says, I know what the solution to this is, a whistleblowing hotline, then you have not met millennials. Because we don't call people. And if you look at the success of whistleblowing hotlines, that's also totally abysmal. So calling people, we don't really believe it's third party. We don't really like the fact that we have to pick up the phone. Going into someone's office, also really scary. This is why, with my two co-founders, I created Talk to Spot. Talk to Spot is a free AI-based tool that walks you through a memory interview of what happened, creates a timestamp PDF, then you can decide, do I want to keep this as evidence in case the situation escalates, in case I want to take it forward later, or do I want to submit it to my employer right away? And in line with one of the other barriers that was particularly publicized this year in the UK by the Equality and Human Rights Commission in March, It was that organizations need to have an anonymous online reporting tool. Now, the reason it needs to be anonymous is because people are afraid of losing their jobs. People are afraid of consequences. And the only way to promise them that this is not going to directly impact them in their work, the job that they might love. This is the other thing. These aren't necessarily unhappy employees. They're just unhappy that something has happened, and they'd quite like it to stop. So in order to keep those people and keep them happy, potentially there's a better way of doing this. And so you can keep this PDF, you can send it to your employer, and you can do it anonymously. And I think that there are many benefits to using an AI instead of using a human being. Now, for one of the reasons that people mention that they don't come forward is they don't know how to report. Now, this surprised me, because I would have expected, well, can't you just look it up? Go on your intranet, go on Google, I don't know, figure it out. Then I tried it in my own organization, and I had absolutely no idea where to go. Then I thought about circumstances that I'd experienced, inappropriate moments at work that I probably should have or would have liked to report. Did I report any of them? No, absolutely none of them. Probably one of the reasons was because I wouldn't have even known where to start. So things like AI can walk you through the basics. What actually is harassment? What actually is discrimination? How does this particular tool, for example, actually protect my privacy and my data? Can I be sure that you're on my side? The next thing it does is it walks you through a perfect memory interview. Now, this is where I get excited. So my background is in memory science. I do research in particular on criminal psychology and memory interviews for important emotional events. Now, when I get called as an expert in court, the first question almost always has to do with, well, how do we know that this memory is accurate? How do we know that this actually happened? Now, one of the best ways to show that something actually happened and to show that your details are as clear and good as they can be is to have time-stamped contemporaneous evidence. To say, hey, actually, I recorded something on the day. Or, hey, I've got this evidence because this person also sent me an email or a Slack message or a WhatsApp. This person sent me an obscene photo, the amount of obscene photo cases. Another thing that we sometimes forget is that these things are already being used in cases, these time-stamped pieces of information. I haven't been in a court case in the last couple of years without a Facebook Messenger message being publicly displayed. Generally, don't write people things that you wouldn't want read aloud in a disposition. Be nice to each other. Don't write stuff that you might later regret. This stuff counts as evidence, and one of the reasons it's good evidence is because it's time-stamped. Now, that's one thing that's good about it. The other thing from a scientific perspective is it's really easy to ask the wrong questions. Now, we're all familiar with unconscious bias. We're all familiar that interview practices, when it comes to hiring people, when it comes to evaluations, annual job evaluations to see if people are fit for promotions, we know that unconscious biases and sometimes very overt biases come into play and affect our decision-making. They make us not as good at making the correct decision as to what to do with someone and whether to promote them or support them or how. Now, one way to get around this is to make sure that we have a scripted interview. And in memory science, the best possible interview is a neutral one, not a therapy session, not an emotional one. We're not there to support you through this emotional piece of this, at least. It's a neutral information-seeking approach that cannot be biased. And so SPOT actually uses what's called the cognitive interview. Now, those of you familiar with memory science know that the cognitive interview is pretty much the gold standard for what, for example, the police are trained to ask witnesses in order to get the highest quality memory evidence. And so our bot is the first bot that's been trained to use exactly this method to make sure that we get as factual and non-leading an interview as possible. So it's really about asking what happened. You can, of course, correct and edit your responses. It is a completely private experience, and this is something that's important for us to communicate with our users all the way through, is that unlike with a human being, being behind a screen and talking to a chatbot or an artificial intelligence can in fact be a completely private experience. We don't keep your data unless you tell us to. We don't send it anywhere unless you tell us to. We don't even, we sometimes get accused of this, isn't data the new oil? I've heard this a couple times now. I said, well, if that's the new oil, we're not mining it because that's not what we're looking for right now. It's not what we're drilling for. We want to make sure that people know that they're in a safe place and that they can just share what happened. And so we start with open-ended questions. The person can write as much of a response as they want in a free-form text. The AI comes in what are called probes. So in a cognitive interview, what makes it effective isn't just the neutral language, which again is really difficult to get right. This is something else. If you're looking at this going, oh, that seems really simple. We've got 5 PhDs working on this who've been working on this for a year and a half, and we're constantly adjusting the language. This is really hard. One of the things the AI does is it picks up on specific keywords and phrases that we've trained it to identify so that it asks you to give it more information. Now, we've actually done empirical research on this at this point, which shows that only in this condition, when there are these probes, these AI questions, people do, in fact, give more details, and those details are more accurate. And so they work. Now, once you've gone through it, you can create this PDF record, download it, keep it, that's it, if you want. Or you can send it into your employer. Now, one thing that we see employers get most excited about is the ability to respond. And so again, the beauty of AI is that you don't need to meet someone face-to-face, and someone can stay completely anonymous, and essentially Spot can mediate and make sure that the two of you can still communicate back and forth. It's not a one-way model. Now, this is empowering to both sides. This is empowering to the user, and it's empowering to the organization. And so you can follow up with a custom interview where, again, you can't mess it up, because we've pre-filtered follow-up questions that you're allowed to ask. And if you want custom ones, you need to run them through us. So that if you're in a rush as an HR professional, if your team is quickly trying to react, which is a good thing, because the consequences are way better if you respond quickly and show someone you've taken their complaint seriously. But if you do that quickly, it's really, again, easy to maybe ask leading or suggestive questions. And so we make that impossible, because you get to select the questions, it takes them back into a Spot chat. The other part of this is managing responses. So there's also a whole back end, which is actually how we monetize this. We don't sell the front end. We don't sell the AI. We just sell the back end, the management system, because we think that this tool should be free to use for individuals, sometimes especially for individuals who have organizations who aren't willing to buy this kind of product. So the tool for teams allows you to manage and respond and talk to each other within a team to make sure that these cases are managed more appropriately than maybe currently processes allow. Now, what kinds of industries are interested in using AI to tackle workplace harassment and discrimination? We're seeing that AI is a remit almost for lots of organizations right now. You're probably seeing the same thing, that AI is popping up everywhere. And this is also where I feel like I want to make it clear. I'm using this word quite loosely. We just use natural language processing. It's not rocking the boat. This isn't brand new. You don't need to reinvent artificial intelligence to create really useful, practical, ethical tools that can really improve people's lives. What we want to do is not to create an AI that feels really human. The whole point is that it doesn't feel human. The whole point is that it gets around the things that are the problems with talking to humans. What we want to do is to make the user feel more human. We want the human to feel more human, not the AI. And so the technologies and the industries that seem interested so far, we actually have a couple who are at Wired. So we have a couple of businesses here who are already, as of recently, using Spot, which is really exciting. And we're hoping to grow into various fields. By the way, tech, besides fintech, you guys have been great. Tech is super slow to adopt this. So slow. I think one of the reasons is a lack of insight. And again, maybe saying that's not our problem. We have a great tech company. And often based on what? We don't get any reports. Maybe people just aren't talking to you. The second thing is that I think tech companies often think, well, we'll just build something like that ourselves. But the problem is as soon as you're not third party, as soon as you're not independent, people probably aren't going to trust that they can really be anonymous. Anyway, other spaces where this I think will be really useful are human rights. We're, again, an organization we're working with right now is a human rights organization. And hopefully startups and other kinds of smaller organizations that maybe don't have structures in place yet that can grow with the use of AI and really flesh out these tools as they go along and build right from the ground up the right kind of culture, the right kind of space. Because ultimately what we want to do is we want to get people to come forward and to feel good about coming forward, even if they feel they need to stay masked. We want people not just to talk about sexual harassment. We want people to talk about all different kinds of harassment and discrimination. And the other thing that I really, really, really want you to stop asking me, because you always ask me this, the big you. So does that mean we need to fire everyone we get a report for? How can I find out who the 2 or 3 bad people in my organization are? That is the wrong question. These are systemic issues. The bad apples idea is flawed so fundamentally that it makes me cringe every time I hear this question. You can't just find a couple of people, fire them, and say, we beat sexism. It's not how it works. It's a systemic issue. You need to build a culture where people can speak up and have the tools that they can use, that they're comfortable with to do so. And sometimes those tools might involve AI. So I encourage you, join the reporting revolution. And if you want to join Spot, here's how to get in touch with me. Thank you.